Welcome to this Council for Learning Disabilities webinar. I'm Rachel Jurgensen, and today Rachel Donegan and I will be discussing all things small grants. Let's start with some objectives for this webinar. By the end of this webinar, you'll be able to understand what a small grant is and why you might pursue one, describe how to identify possible sources of funding to support your work, and describe key considerations when applying for funding. First, you might be thinking, what is a small grant and why should I pursue one? Have you ever said, I have an idea, but you weren't quite sure how to make that idea come to life? A small grant can help with that. So, what is a small grant? We consider a small grant to be funding that supports your work that is about $5,000 or less. Sometimes you might hear this called seed money. You may want to pursue a small grant for seed money to run a pilot study that will support a future larger grant. You may want to pursue a small grant to give yourself time to develop a course at your institution. Funding dissertation work is another great reason to go after a small grant. So you have an idea, and now you need to figure out where to find funding to make your idea come to life. Let's talk about how to identify possible sources of funding. When thinking about possible funding sources, we can look at internal funding sources and external funding sources. Internal funding sources would be funding available at your institution. Some examples of this are funds available through your institution's Center for Teaching and Learning. Many times, the Center for Teaching and Learning will have funds available for course development or professional development related to higher education instruction. Also, undergraduate student engagement and research and service learning grants are great places to look for funding. Your institution may provide funds through technology innovation for teaching, research, and creativity grants, or your college may have a faculty service grant. Another option for funding is to look and think interdisciplinary. Who could you collaborate with to bridge two fields of study and pursue an interdisciplinary grant? And finally, another great option for funding is your institution's professional development funds, which can often be used for research or travel or disseminating research. External funding sources can be found outside of your institution. You can look at professional organizations you are a part of, such as ERA. Oftentimes, there are foundations with available grants, such as the Learning Disabilities Foundation of America and the Dollar General Literacy Foundation, for example. Your State Department of Education has funds available to fund small grants as well. Additionally, asking colleagues and checking out colleagues' CVs can give you some ideas of other places to look for sources of funding.
I'm Rachel Donegan, and I'll be finishing our presentation today. Next, let's discuss how to apply once you've identified a small grant that fits the needs of your project. When you think about applying for a grant, we suggest keeping 4 key things in mind. It's not about you, it's about the funder. Carefully considering if you should apply, making sure you plan a reasonable project, and making a plan to seek out collaborators. First, let's talk about it's not about you. When applying for grants, keep in mind that you should be considering your project from the funder's point of view. Remember, it's not about you, it's about them. The funder will be looking for how well your project fits their requirements. Carefully read the request for proposals and requirements, trying to take on the funder's point of view. When completing your application, make sure to use their language. For example, if the funding targets projects supporting multi-tiered systems of support, use this terminology rather than response to intervention. Doing this is a first step in making the alignment between your project and the funder's needs clear. Many times, the requests for proposals include headings detailing what to include in your application. Use these headings throughout your application and narrative, making it easy for anyone reading your proposal to find the requested information. Finally, in addition to carefully reading the request for proposals, make sure to examine any rubrics or scoring criteria the funder has released. Read these before beginning your application, while completing it, and after it's complete, comparing your performance to the criteria. Occasionally, funders will provide examples of previously funded proposals. These can be helpful in uncovering what exactly the funder is looking for. If an example of a successful previous proposal isn't provided by the funder, you might try contacting colleagues who have previously won the award or the pre-award office at your university for the names of any individuals at your institutions who have had success. In addition to providing a copy of their proposals, these individuals might also have other insight that you might find helpful. Now let's talk about, once you've found a small grant you think should work, making a decision if you should apply. Remember, you want your interests and project goals to align with the funder. If it's a stretch to get your project to fit the funder's interests and goals, then it's likely not a good fit. Also consider the timeline. For example, when is the proposal due? Do you have enough time to complete the proposal successfully? Does your university need time to check on restrictions or to submit your proposal? And finally, does the timeline for spending funds work for your project? Will the funds be awarded by the time you need them, and will you be able to spend them by the end of the funding window? Also carefully consider any funding restrictions and if there are any conflicts with your needs. Sketch out a budget with anticipated costs and compare to the funder. Does the total award amount fit the total cost you have budgeted? Are there any restrictions on what the funds can be spent on? For example, let's say you were planning on applying for a small grant to fund a small-scale intervention study. If one of your major costs is paying for a research assistant to implement the intervention and collect data, and your funder only allows funds to be spent on materials, not on paying people, then the grant is likely not a good fit for your needs due to that funding restriction. Now that you've carefully considered your project and have found it aligns well with your potential funder, it's time to plan and propose a reasonable project, one that can be carried out using the time and resources that you have available. First, we suggest carefully considering the available time you have to dedicate to the project. I find it helpful to consider my time on a weekly basis. I ask myself, how much time will I have available each week to devote to this project? If it will only be a few hours, I know I don't want to plan a project that involves creating materials or interventions, lots of time-intensive data collection, or travel to sites. Alongside this, you'll want to consider how this project can be balanced among your other responsibilities of teaching and service, as well as other ongoing research projects. Also, take stock of the available resources you have to dedicate to the project. This is helpful to consider alongside any funding restrictions and your outlined budget. For example, perhaps the funder won't cover needed technology. You might check and see if that technology is available already through the resources in your department or at your university to fill in any gaps that might be present. Finally, we suggest seeking out collaborators. Although we're talking about this last, you could do this at any stage when thinking about applying or planning a reasonable project. There are various reasons why you might seek out collaborators. For example, you might have expertise in the content area of the project, but you might need a collaborator who has methodological expertise to help you plan a project that is sound. Or perhaps your project has overlapping content areas and you want collaborators with specific expertise in each area to make your team more robust. Another area you may seek out collaborators and support is from individuals who will be able to provide you with feedback on your project. Seeking outside feedback at various stages of project conceptualization and planning can be helpful and keep you from straying towards plans that are overly ambitious. We suggest seeking feedback not only on your final proposal you will submit to your funder, but also on early stages of project conceptualization and planning. For example, someone might be able to give you feedback on a brief concept paper outlining why your project is needed, its purpose, and a brief outline of the methodology and anticipated benefits. Someone might be able to look over a budget and help you consider any project needs you might have missed. Seeking feedback from multiple colleagues at different stages of project conceptualization and planning can be the most helpful way to use collaborators for feedback. Finally, let's discuss how to develop a concept paper. A concept paper is a brief 1 to 5 page paper summarizing the project. Agencies funding larger awards may ask for a concept paper prior to submitting a full proposal. While this is not usually required for small grants, we find a concept paper helpful as a first step to get your ideas on paper and suggest it as a way to communicate and get early feedback on your planned projects. We also find that the structure and sections of the concept paper mirror what's required in many proposals. Therefore, it provides a nice common structure to lay out the different elements that should be present in your proposal. A concept paper has 6 parts: introduction, rationale, project plan, expected impact, budget, and contact information. The first section is the introduction. The introduction aligns you as the applicant with the funder. It should detail why the funder should support projects in the general area of your project. Next, the second section, the rationale, should review prior research in the area, explain where a gap in knowledge exists, and also explain how your project aims to fill that gap. This is similar to the literature review and purpose section of a research article. This section should also provide information on the significance of your project. Why is it important and why should it be supported? Next, the project description details how you, as the applicant, will go about filling the gap you identified. This should include a statement of goals and objectives. Goals detail long-term abstract aims. For example, a goal to improve reading performance among students with disabilities. An objective should detail the specific, measurable outcome aligned with the goal. For an example, an objective to provide a structured professional development program to teachers on reading intervention methods for students with reading disabilities. This section should also include a methodology of description of project activities that will be followed to reach the goals and objectives. It should be specific, detailing who does what with whom. Examples of activities you might include on this are implementing a professional development, training interventionists, implementing an intervention, and analyzing data. The project plan should also include a timeline that details a month-by-month progression of when the project activities should be carried out. Closely aligned with the project plan is the expected impacts. This section should detail what you anticipate the outcomes of the project to be, who will benefit, and how. This should be aligned with your rationale and the need you identified at the start of your proposal, as well as with your project plan. Next, you should also include a budget outlining the main needs of your project and anticipated costs. Finally, make sure to include your contact information, including institution, position, and email, and the contact information for the Office for External Funding Requests at your institution, if that's needed. The sections of the concept paper mirror that of a logic model. A logic model is a conceptualization of how your idea is supposed to work. It details why your idea is a good solution to the identified problem and how you intend to go about solving it. It includes information on the resources you have available, how you will use the resources and different project activities to solve the problem, direct and measurable outputs of your project, the anticipated outcomes, and finally, a big picture view of the overall impacts of your program. For more information on how to develop a concept paper or logic model, see the resources section included with this presentation. As mentioned earlier, we recommend seeking feedback at multiple points throughout developing your concept paper and/or drafting your proposal. You might find it a good idea to reach out to the funding agency at the beginning stages of developing your proposal to clarify any questions you may have after reading the request for proposals. For example, you might consider asking how proposals will be reviewed if that's not specified. Will it be a blind review by several individuals? Will reviewers be laypeople, academics, or content area experts? This can help guide how you will write your proposal. Colleagues can provide useful feedback at various stages of drafting your proposal. We suggest seeking feedback from multiple colleagues. It may also be helpful to tell colleagues particular parts of the proposal you would like feedback on. For example, is my review of the literature comprehensive enough? We also suggest getting feedback from colleagues who have different areas of expertise than yours and may not be as well versed in the exact area of your proposal. This can help you make sure your proposal is understandable to others who might not be in your exact content area. Rereading the request for proposals as you are working through drafts can help you ensure that you cover everything requested. Finally, as mentioned earlier, we suggest reviewing other successful proposals. We suggest doing this before you start your proposal and after you have it drafted. You might consider matching the example proposals to any scoring criteria or the request for proposals provided by the funder. How did they fulfill the different parts included in the request for proposals successfully? This can help you identify any parts you may have missing or strayed away from what the funder requested. Thank you for viewing this presentation. We hope it's been helpful in providing you with information on what small grants are and starting you on the process of applying for one. We've linked other additional resources we found helpful in the resources and description section of this video. Please feel free to reach out to either of us with any additional questions.